Chapter 10, Connection, Communication, and the Atom. Do you know why you can't trust an atom? Because they make up everything. This cute joke highlights that everything in our universe, including us, is comprised of atoms. Each atom contains electrons, protons, and neutrons, collectively called subatomic particles. These particles are made of continuous fluid-like substances known as quantum fields. In the Royal Academy YouTube video, Quantum Fields, the Real Building Blocks of the Universe, lecturer David Tong puts his hands on a desk and declares to the audience that this desk is made of these fields. And so are we. It sounds crazy, but it's true. Direct interaction between subatomic particles is called quantum entanglement. Imagine that two electrons have an invisible link, each spinning in the opposite direction, influencing the actions of each other. Doing something to one pair of entangled particles, even at a great distance, instantly affects the other. Test after test, this bizarre theory has proven accurate and is the key ingredient for super powerful quantum computers, which solve complex problems faster than regular computers. Some scientists have seen hints that entanglement is at work in our brains, which could explain its enormous computing capabilities. Why wouldn't it be at work in our entire body? After all, atoms make up everything. I'm not sharing this to bore you, but because I want you to see yourself as an entangled being. Connection and communication are the fabric of who we are and everything that exists. The body accomplishes this by utilizing electrical, light, and chemical signals. These signals travel the body using the connections found in our amazing nervous and blood systems. Our beautiful peptides of emotion speak to us by producing feelings within the body. Without it, we die. That is how important communication is for all of us. Yet so many of us have anxiety about what's being said to us by the body. By extension, we do the same in our communications with people. Communication breakdown can be the undoing of relationships of every kind. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was chiefly due to miscommunication. Businesses, partnerships, marriages, and families have failed because of not being on the same wavelength. If atoms are made of fields, are we communicating vibrations that others pick up? Let me explain. You are a walking vibrator. Christian Huygens was a brilliant Dutch scientist born in 1629. He was a manufacturer of accurate pendulum clocks. For those of you who have no idea what a pendulum clock is, it uses a swinging weight as the element to keep time moving back and forth at intervals based on its length. The time between movements, or an oscillation, is how time is measured. It worked well and was the most accurate way to keep time for 270 years when the quartz clock was invented. Since not everyone knows what one might look like, I added a photograph so you can see the hanging pendulum. Huygens noticed that two of his pendulum clocks mounted next to each other often became synchronized, swinging in opposite directions. Sound familiar with the description of entangled atoms? The rhythmic motion of the pendulum created a vibration, which is electromagnetic energy. When swinging together on the same wall mount, the smaller clock assumed the rhythm of the larger clock, or the greater generator of energy. When two objects of similar vibration are nearby, the object of lesser or weaker vibration will begin to match that of a stronger vibration, creating resonance or synchronization. We experience entrainment all the time. If a firefly or lightning bug lands on the branch with another one, their body's light will sync up. Women living together usually see their menstrual cycles begin around the same time each month. Birds will fly in unison. Have you ever noticed that when people start clapping at the end of the concert, it is all over the place, and after a few minutes, everybody falls into a beautiful rhythm? That is entrainment. It's the transfer of energy that takes place. We all fall into the same vibration. Entrainment occurs because every cell in our body vibrates and produces electromagnetic energy. Thank goodness it's on a nanoscale, or we would look funny walking down the street. However, there are occasions when the vibration of these cells is not in unison. Sickly cells vibrate differently. According to Mohsen Jafari and Mohammed Hassan Zadeh, in the article Cell-Specific Frequency as a New Hallmark to Early Detection of Cancer and Efficient Therapy, Recording a Cancer Voice as a New Horizon. This appears to be true with cancer cells. There are more evidences for the existence of specific cell frequencies in the form of the response of each cell to its own specific frequency and the frequency between normal and tumor cell frequency levels. Based on these evidences, it can be introduced as a hallmark with the inability to distinction between normal and tumor cells for cancer detection. They write, our suggestion is to hear the voice of cancer by designing and developing a non-invasive, biocompatible, affordable, and miniaturized tools such as nano antennas and implantable biosensors that are able to detect and record cell-specific frequencies. How amazing would that be to identify cancer cells just based on their frequency? It might allow us to find cancer cells earlier. We produce vibrational waves within the body for internal communication, but does that extend beyond our physical self? The heart is associated with love and other emotions throughout history and in different cultures. Interestingly enough, the heart is also the body's most significant generator of electromagnetic energy, providing another way in which we perceive the emotions of others. It makes sense since it is way bigger than a single cell and is constantly pounding. Its energy has been measured up to 3 feet from the body in all directions. When you think of other forms of communication that use electromagnetic energy, such as cell phones, Wi-Fi, televisions, and radio broadcasting, it might go farther than 3 feet, only the ability to measure it isn't there. Perhaps there is another explanation, but feeling the vibration of others would answer why we can feel someone staring at us or when being followed on the street. There are instances when we feel focused attention without any input from our eyes. Think about how often you hear people talk about feeling another person's energy. Jeff Bezos summed it up quite nicely in his 2018 interview with Matthias Döpfner, the CEO of Business Insider's parent company, Axel Springer. You never want to be that guy. We all have a coworker who's that person, who, as soon as they come into a meeting, they drain all of the energy out of the room. You can just feel the energy go whoosh. You don't want to be that guy. You want to come into the office and give everyone a kick in their step. I want to be the biggest heart in the room, defeating any energy vampires that want to suck the positivity out of those around them. I make it my mission when I go out in the world to make other people I encounter feel better in some way. It makes me feel good, and I feel like it strengthens my heart for when energy suckers appear. Being aware of that guy Bezos referred to is my best defense to block the connection to unhealthy vibes. It isn't just the person in the room, but it's also the energy of words. Now we are heading back to the waves of sensory information we perceive in communication. You can't listen and talk to yourself. Hearing is the perception of sound waves coming into the brain, occurring 24/7 every day. When you sleep, there's a constant input of auditory signals going into the brain. You only hear it when the brain thinks you need to pay attention. We have different stages of sleep where louder noises can be disruptive, like snoring. Hearing is effortless and non-conscious. We don't need to think about hearing. It just happens. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines listening as to pay attention to sound, to hear something with thoughtful attention and give consideration, which takes well-spent effort and energy if you want healthy communication. I like Simon Sinek's quote, "There's a difference between listening and waiting for your turn to speak." You can hear and not listen, but you cannot listen without hearing. Sounds confusing? Music can be playing in the background, conversations can take place around you, and dogs can be barking all at once. You hear it all. Listening requires paying attention to the words spoken, the tone, volume, and inflection of the voice. Concentration can be interrupted by internal and external noises. A knock on the door, a phone ringing, or other disruptions can divert your focus. Another interruption is your inner monologue, conversations with yourself, either preparing a response, thinking about another topic you want to discuss, or perhaps what you want to have for dinner that night. You can't listen and talk simultaneously. You can only hear or talk, and that goes for those internal conversations. People think they can do both when it's impossible. Your brain can only do one thing at a time for active mental activities requiring concentration. It can subconsciously handle those repetitive tasks and allow conversational engagement. Still, you might catch parts of what was said because at any given moment, what you are doing might require concentration. You would never know if the words you didn't hear were important. I can prove your brain's inability to multitask with a quick test. Have someone time you as you complete it, or time yourself. Here is the test. Get a plain piece of paper and draw 2 horizontal lines. While being timed, on the first line, write, "I am a great multitasker." On the second line, write the numbers 1 through 20 sequentially. 1, 2, 3, 4. Stop the timer and write down the time. It should take around 20 seconds. Flip the paper over and draw 2 lines again. While timed, you will complete the same 2 lines, only alternating between the 2. Write a letter on the top line, a number on the line below, the subsequent letter in the sentence on the upper line, and the following number in the sequence. For instance, you could write the letter I on the top line, then a 1 on the bottom line. Then on the top line, you would write A, and then 2 on the bottom line. Keep it going until the sentence is complete and the entire sequence of numbers is populated. Stop the timer and write down the time. For most people, the second attempt takes twice as long. The reason is that your brain's task processing is 2 steps. The first is goal shifting, which happens when you move from one task to another. The second is rule activation, turning off the rules for how a brain completes a task to turn on a rule for how to complete the new task. For this reason, you can't talk and listen. So being aware of your internal monologue helps us to be effective listeners. Extremists think communication means agreeing with them. This quote from Leo Roston, author of Passions and Prejudices, or Some of My Best Friends or People, cracks me up every time I read it. At first, I thought that the use of the word extremist was, well, extreme. But then, after thinking about it, if we hold a view so tightly that we can't consider another viewpoint or alter ours, perhaps that is extreme. In conversational receptiveness, improving engagement with opposing views, researcher Yeomans and colleagues wrote the paper with emotionally charged conversations in mind. They define conversational receptiveness as the use of language to communicate one's willingness to thoughtfully engage with opposing views. The nuts and bolts of it are people want to be heard, and if you can make them feel like they're heard, they are going to be more open to listening to you. Communication gets stunted in situations where people don't agree, such as polarizing topics. Being receptive to opposing views doesn't equate to agreeing with them. It just shows a willingness to hear the other person's interpretation or conviction, keeping in mind that we all have different recipes. Asking detailed questions to better understand another person's position is a good way. Giving thoughtful consideration to another perspective can open up the way for people to do likewise. My way or the highway doesn't lend itself to receptive listening. Notice I said thoughtful consideration to another perspective. I have watched news shows that are supposed to show both sides of an issue or a story. Still, often, it's a perfunctory action, not giving effort or reflection to the other side of whatever leaning that situation represents. Speaking only of where I live, it is no wonder that the United States is so divided. The word's conversational receptiveness intrigued me. In my mind, I saw words spoken like a ball being passed back and forth in a game of toss. Imagine a ball representing an idea or point of view, or what I have named a conversational ball. If you throw the conversational ball to the other side and none of the receivers, those with differing beliefs, attempt to pick it up, the ball drops to the ground. Ignoring the ball you send over, one of them picks up their own conversational ball, representing their interpretation or position, tossing it over to you. You let it land on the ground, and the cycle begins again. As an observer, you would think, how silly. Why not catch the ball and return it? Yet it happens in daily conversations and discussions. The healthier activity is to toss the communication to the other person who catches it, holds it to consider what was received, and then throws their thoughts back, staying on topic, demonstrating that they listen to what was just said. But who wants to play with someone who keeps the conversational ball too long? It's good to allow space for others to speak or respond. Going on and on about our pearls of wisdom or point of view makes it harder for the other person to keep their mind focused. Some people love the sound of their own voice. I have gotten bored with long talkers and wondered, are they ever going to stop speaking? Long talking does not always apply to storytelling or venting, but you still want to have your audience in mind and gauge attentiveness. In any discussion, especially when our inner monologue is yammering at us, we can clarify what we think we just heard with a question. Even better, admit you were distracted and ask if they could repeat what was just said. If you think they weren't listening or were distracted, you can ask, I want to make sure I'm communicating clearly. What did you just hear me say? Allowing you to address any perception errors on the listener's part and the opportunity to clarify your message. Engaging or holding the attention of any person in a conversation requires respect and attentiveness, not only to their words, but also to the emotions they might have around the topic. Acknowledging them goes a long way. If we can learn how to play ball conversationally, perhaps we can make those conversations more productive. Shutting down communication with willful blindness. Regarding sensory input from the eyes, what we see is likely not the whole picture, or we can choose not to see things. This is called willful blindness. The phrase originated as a legal term for people who knew what was going on, but were purposefully unaware of the fact of a criminal deed. It is the I didn't see anything or I wasn't there excuse that people tried to use to clear them from prosecution. Our emotions can make us willfully blind if we are not careful. We don't want something to be true, so we often ignore reality to the detriment of ourselves and others. Margaret Heffernan, author of Willful Blindness, Why We Ignore the Obvious at Our Peril, recounts several actual events of how the willful blindness of a few impacted the lives of many. The story that sticks out the most for me is that of Dr. Alice Stewart. Back in the day, people would have an x-ray for shoe fittings. Pregnant mothers would have x-rays of their unborn children. Today, that would be barbaric, but the dangers were unknown back then. It was quite the industry and a common practice among physicians. In 1953, Dr. Stewart was the first to demonstrate the link between x-rays during pregnancy and infant mortality rates and diseases. The then male-dominated medical community dismissed her irrefutable findings. It wasn't until 1970 that the practice was discontinued. Was it because the evidence came from a woman? Perhaps. Or maybe the physicians couldn't emotionally handle the thought of being responsible for the scarred lives of so many families. Another factor could have been money, as x-rays were a form of income. No matter the reason, refusing to believe or even attempting to duplicate her findings resulted in the unnecessary loss of life and illnesses for almost 2 decades. I have personal experience with willful blindness. Growing up in an alcoholic home, I couldn't see what the disease did to my life, and the lives of my family for many years. I struggled to apply the word alcoholic to my mother. That word came with a lot of ramifications and unpleasant feelings. It was only when she went into rehab that I was able to come to terms with the facts of my life. Opening my eyes to the reality of alcoholism helped me to heal, but it also helped me to support my mother and develop boundaries for the first time in my life. You would think that would keep me from ever being willfully blind again. About 8 years into my marriage to my first husband, he began an affair with a person who worked for us. Deep down, I knew something was happening between them, but I pushed those thoughts away. I had a lot invested in our relationship, and I loved his parents as if they were mine, and I didn't want to lose them. The emotional and mental energy spent staying blind took a toll. Eventually, I faced the ugly truth because I couldn't keep my feelings down. One night, my intuition told me he wasn't where he was supposed to be, teaching an anatomy class at a local college. So I stopped what I was doing and drove by the school to see if his car was there, only to find an empty parking lot. I went to her home and discovered his SUV was parked outside. I threw him out that night even though he swore he wasn't having an affair. He was, and it had been going on for almost a year. I finally listened to my body, and it was right. I know it took me a long time, but I was very much in love, and we had 2 businesses, so there was a lot at stake. The thing is, the outcome would have been the same if I had opened my eyes sooner, only I wouldn't have lost so much time. I haven't suffered from willful blindness on a large scale like that since. Not to say there weren't more minor incidents, it happens. I practice awareness and question myself to help prevent it. I know that my parents modeled willful blindness, and likely their parents behaved similarly. It is a reason, but not an excuse, to let it continue after recognizing it in myself. The thought of facing your reality might create anxiety in your body. I get it. I helped my friend Jamie, who divorced an unfaithful husband a few years ago, move past her willful blindness. Just as it was in my case, everyone could see it but her. Once the blinders were off, while unpleasant, she too, like me, found that the relief and freedom eventually outweighed the pain of reality. She opened her eyes at a comfortable pace for her, as she would because it was her journey. It has been years, but Jamie still thanks me to this day. In fact, she has found a wonderful man, and she is very much in love. Willful blindness isn't limited to infidelity. We can be blind to any emotional situation we don't want to face. It could be our misbehaving child, our participation in an event, or a religious, social, or political issue. It comes down to not wanting something to be true because it means we have to face feelings we don't like, one of which could be that we are wrong, like the doctors who didn't believe X-rays could be deadly. Willful blindness shuts down our internal communication. We feel it in our bodies but close our inner ears to it. Because of this, we can have unexplained anxiety or physical issues. Our anger can get misplaced and our lives suffer. We might negatively impact others. If you think you might be willfully blind to a situation, that is a strong hint you are. I encourage those with this thought to overcome their fears by cautiously exploring the feelings and trusting their gut to lead them forward. Don't forget to lean on those who support you and can provide a different perspective. Words matter. As emotion chefs, we understand that emotions are the primary driver of our thoughts, decisions, and behaviors. The stronger the emotion, the more passion we have in our words. Understanding that our brain predicts using past experience can help us identify when these recipes might be impacting our ability to hear words or capture intention correctly. If our mood or health is low, this plays a big part in how well we communicate. Unpleasant emotions, i.e., anger, sadness, stress, fear, defensiveness, or anxiety, narrow our focus, while more pleasant emotions, i.e., joy, love, awe, happiness, and gratitude, widen it. Our ability to zoom in or out of our focus is part of emotion regulation. The tools from this book have helped me to understand not only my recipes, but also to have compassion for other people's emotions and how they respond to me. We each have unique emotion recipes, so we can't assume the basis for other people's feelings or responses. We may or may not successfully identify the emotions of others. A face or body stance doesn't always tell the story. Words matter. They matter in how we label our emotions and when we speak to and receive the words of others. Yes, we have the dictionary to guide us with the words' conventional meaning, but when in context, those words can take on a more distinct meaning for every person because of how they associate those words in their minds. This might require more detail and explanation. When you see someone not catching the conversational ball, clarifying words and their meanings is a byproduct of increased awareness. Words and their meaning are important, especially when we adopt other people's language as our own. In grade school, my mom drove my older brother and me somewhere. I don't know what he was doing, but it was highly annoying, like older brothers can be. We didn't wear seatbelts back then, so I was leaning over the front seat between my mom and Jeff, and I called him a pussy. My mother gasped. She didn't yell at me, but asked where I learned the word. I heard it at school when someone yelled it at a person they didn't like. She then asked me if I knew what it meant, and I admitted I didn't know. She told me, and I felt embarrassed and awful. If we assign words or phrases to people, countries, groups, or parties, knowing what that phrase represents or how it is defined would be an excellent idea. Too often, we parrot others, not knowing what it truly means. I was lazy back then, just repeating other kids at school. What I said was both hurtful and mean. Sorry about that, Jeff. I can remember another occasion where I assumed the feelings of coworkers. I was a young, gullible tool used to deliver a message to the big boss about our direct manager, Linda. Why? Because I didn't know my own feelings on the matter and didn't take the time to examine the situation. I was voicing the feelings of others. Many years later, I found Linda and apologized, admitting my responsibility and regret. She cried and thanked me. I hurt her more than I knew. The words we use matter to us and our perceptions. The words we use matter to others and their perceptions. Words really matter. Our brain can get in the way of listening, and so can our recipes. Our conversations are enhanced if we allow ourselves to be wrong, distracted, and curious about what someone is saying. Most importantly, it is trying not to take it too personally. There is a balance between being overly sensitive and numb to the needs of others. Being part of an emotion chef is figuring that out for ourselves and not presuming for others. We develop strong relationships when we are attentive listeners. One of the communication shortcomings that I work on is not over-talking someone. It isn't all the time, but more when I'm in a hurry, have a lot on my mind, or have something to say that I'm worried I will forget. A clear indication I'm not listening or impatient with a long talker. I'm working on it. The idea is that we give grace to ourselves when we make mistakes in our communication. It's about striving to make it better, not about being perfect, and enhancing our connection with others.